Introduction. The kitchen island is covered in white piles that look like small snowdrifts. Under the soft glow of a single pendant light, these piles reveal themselves to be more than just paper. There are utility bills with pink, past due notices peeking through the envelopes. There are colorful flyers for preschool fundraisers, and a crumpled receipt from a grocery trip that cost twice what it should have. A half-empty mug of cold coffee sits near the edge, leaving a dark ring on a bank statement. In the middle of it all sits a laptop, its screen glowing with a spreadsheet that doesn't quite make sense. The room is silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car driving through a puddle on the street outside. This is the place where the math happens, but tonight the math is failing. The illusion of wealth. In the year 1819, the streets of Philadelphia and New York were buzzing with a feeling of great success. The War of 1812 was over, and it felt like everyone was getting rich. People were buying land as fast as they could. They were building big houses and filling them with fine furniture from Europe. To anyone looking on, it seemed like a golden age. There was just one problem: most of that wealth wasn't real. Banks at the time were handing out loans like they were candy. They printed their own paper money, and people spent it as fast as they received it. It was a giant bubble of credit. Families who had very little in the bank were living like royalty because they believed the good times would never end. They were rich on paper, but their pockets were actually full of promises they couldn't keep. Then, in the spring of 1819, the bubble popped. The Second Bank of the United States realized it had let things get out of hand. They stopped handing out easy money and started asking for their loans to be paid back in real gold and silver. Suddenly, the paper money in people's pockets became worthless. The fancy houses were taken away. Factories closed their doors. People who thought they were wealthy found themselves standing in line for soup. It was the first time the United States faced a massive financial crash during a time of peace. This event, known as the Panic of 1819, changed the way people thought about their lives. It was a wake-up call. An anonymous writer in a newspaper at the time wrote that the prosperity of a person is not found in what they earn, but in what they save. The crisis forced a whole generation to look back at the old virtues. They realized that debt was a trap, and that true freedom came from having a solid foundation, not a flashy exterior. They had to learn how to seal the leaks in their buckets before they could ever hope to fill them up again. The financial fog. Most people today are living in a version of that same fog. You might have a job that pays a decent salary. You might have a car that looks nice in the driveway and a house that feels comfortable. But deep down, there is a nagging feeling that something is wrong. It shows up when you are standing in the checkout line at the store. You feel a tiny hit of worry as you swipe your card, wondering if the transaction will actually go through. It shows up when a light on your car's dashboard turns on. Instead of just thinking about the repair, your chest tightens. You start doing mental math to figure out which bill you can skip this month to pay the mechanic. This is what it means to live paycheck to paycheck. It is a cycle that feels like running on a treadmill that keeps getting faster. No matter how hard you work or how much your salary grows, the money seems to vanish 3 days before the next payday. You aren't a bad person, and you aren't necessarily poor, but you are a financial firefighter. You spend all your energy putting out small fires, leaving you no time to build the life you actually want. A study done by the Federal Reserve in 2023 showed that a huge number of adults in America could not cover a surprise $400 expense using cash. They would have to put it on a credit card or borrow it from a friend. When you live this way, you are always one flat tire or one broken tooth away from a disaster. It is an exhausting way to live. The stress of not knowing if you are okay eats away at your sleep and your happiness. The promise of the blueprint. The goal of this book is to take you out of that fog. You are going to stop reacting to emergencies and start building a plan. You are going to move from being a financial firefighter to becoming a fiscal architect. An architect doesn't just start stacking bricks and hope for the best. They have a drawing. They know where the pipes go, where the walls sit, and how much weight the floor can hold. They build something that can stand up to a storm. That is what we are going to do with your money. By the time you finish these pages, you will have more than just a budget. You will have a new way of seeing the world. You will learn how to identify the leaks that are draining your hard-earned money without you noticing. Build a moat around your family that keeps the stress of the world at bay. Escape the prison of high-interest debt that makes you feel like you are serving a life sentence. Find a type of frugality that doesn't feel like you are missing out on life, but rather like you are finally taking control of it. This isn't about eating beans and rice in the dark for the rest of your life. It is about intentionality. It is about understanding that financial freedom isn't about how many dollars you have, it's about how many hours of your own life you truly own. Sarah's breaking point. Sarah Jenkins knows exactly what that mental math feels like. Sarah is 34 years old and lives in Chicago. She has a great job as a marketing manager for a tech company. Her husband Dave is a teacher. Together, they make a salary that sounds like a lot of money on paper. To their friends and neighbors, the Jenkins family looks like they have it all figured out. They live in a nice area, they dress. Maya goes to a good preschool. But every night at 11 p.m., Sarah sits at her kitchen island and hides. She waits until Dave is asleep, because she is too ashamed to show him the numbers. She looks at her credit card statement and sees a balance of $22,412. Most of that debt isn't from one big, exciting purchase. It's from 1,000 tiny ones. It's the $15 lunch because she was too busy to pack one. It's the $80 Target run that was supposed to be for paper towels, but ended up including a new rug and a scented candle. It's the convenience of ordering dinner through an app because she was too tired to cook after a long commute on the L train. Tonight, the feeling of being a fraud is heavier than usual. Maya's preschool tuition is due tomorrow, and Sarah realizes she doesn't have enough in the checking account to cover it. She feels a familiar pang of panic in her stomach. She starts wondering which credit card still has a little bit of room left on it. As she moves some papers around, she finds an old dusty envelope. Inside is a $50 savings bond that her grandmother gave her when she was a baby. Sarah stares at it for a long time. She realizes that this piece of paper, worth only $50, is the only real money she actually owns. Everything else in her life, the car, the furniture, the clothes, belongs to the bank. She is tired of being afraid. She is tired of the lifestyle creep that swallowed her raises before she could even enjoy them. She realizes that earning a good salary hasn't made her rich, it has just made her better at hiding how broke she is. This is her rock bottom. This is the moment she decides that the fog has to lift. The path ahead. Sarah's story is not unique. In fact, it is the story of millions of people who are doing their best, but feel like they are losing the game. To help Sarah, and to help you, we are going to look at the wisdom of people who mastered their money long before credit cards and apps existed. We will learn from Benjamin Franklin, who started with nothing and became one of the wealthiest and most respected men in history. He didn't do it by getting lucky. He did it by following a set of habits that turned small amounts of money into a massive fortune. He understood that a small leak will sink a great ship, and he will show us how to find those leaks in our own lives. We will follow the example of Hetty Green, a woman known as the Witch of Wall Street. While everyone else was spending money to look important, Hetty was busy counting her pennies and keeping her records in perfect order. She became the richest woman in the world during a time when women weren't even allowed to vote in many places. Her discipline and her refusal to follow the herd will be our guide for staying calm when the rest of the world is panicking. We will also use the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor who had all the riches in the world but chose to live simply. He taught that happiness doesn't come from what we own, but from the quality of our thoughts. He will help us separate our wants from our needs, so we can stop buying things we don't even like to impress people we don't even know. Over the next several chapters, we will build your blueprint. 1. We will start by rewiring your mindset, moving from a desire for status to a desire for freedom. 2. We will conduct a great audit to see exactly where your money is going. 3. We will learn the art of strategic sacrifice, where we cut the things that don't matter to fund the things that do. 4. We will create a war plan to kill your debt once and for all. 5. Finally, we will learn how to turn your savings into a bulletproof fortress that grows on its own while you sleep. The journey from a financial firefighter to a fiscal architect isn't always easy. It requires you to look at some ugly numbers and make some tough choices. But the reward is something that money can't buy: peace of mind. It is the ability to look at a repair bill and feel nothing but a sense of, "I've got this." It is the freedom to choose how you spend your time, because you are no longer a slave to your bills. Sarah is ready to start. The cold coffee is still on the table, and the past due notices are still there, but for the first time in years, she has a pen in her hand and a plan in her mind. The fog is starting to clear. Let's begin. 1. 6 Pillars of the Wealthy Mindset. The ship was tossing in the cold Atlantic waves, and the year was 1757. Benjamin Franklin sat at a small, cramped desk in his cabin, the candle flickering as the wood groaned around him. He had only a few days left before the ship reached the coast of England. For 25 years he had been writing Poor Richard's Almanac, a little book full of weather forecasts, poems, and bits of advice. This next edition was the big one, the silver anniversary. He needed a preface that would tie everything together, and he needed it before the anchor dropped. As he wrote, he thought about a scene he had witnessed back home in Philadelphia. A crowd of people had gathered at a public auction. They were complaining loudly about the heavy taxes the government was taking from them. They felt squeezed. They felt like they had no control over their own lives. But as Franklin watched them, he noticed something strange. These same people, while complaining about being broke, were bidding high prices on fancy clothes, imported lace, and expensive trinkets they didn't really need. He realized that the government's tax was small compared to the tax these people were putting on themselves. They were taxing themselves through their own laziness, their pride, and their bad habits. He dipped his pen in the ink and began to write what would become one of the most famous essays on money ever written, The Way to Wealth. He wasn't just writing a book, he was building a mindset. He knew that if you didn't fix the way you thought about a dollar, no amount of income would ever be enough to save you. The first pillar, industry. Franklin believed that the foundation of wealth started with industry, which is just a fancy word for hard work and focus. In the 1700s, many people believed that getting rich was mostly about luck or being born into the right family. Franklin disagreed. He saw that the most successful people in Philadelphia weren't the luckiest. They were the ones who stayed at their desks when everyone else went to the tavern. He often said that, "He that hath a trade hath an estate." This meant that your skills and your willingness to use them were your most valuable pieces of property. In today's world, we often get distracted by get-rich-quick schemes, or the idea that we can find a shortcut to financial freedom. Franklin's first pillar reminds us that there is no substitute for being useful. Wealth begins when you decide to be the captain of your own effort. It is the realization that your income isn't just something that happens to you. It is something you create by providing value to the world. When you stop looking for a lucky break and start looking for ways to be more productive, your mindset shifts from a financial firefighter to an architect. You stop waiting for the fire to go out and start building a house that won't burn. The second pillar, frugality. If industry is how you get money, frugality is how you keep it. This is where most people struggle. Franklin watched his neighbors buy expensive silk, even when they owed money to the grocer. He saw that they were trying to look rich, instead of actually being rich. He wrote that a small leak will sink a great ship. This is the core of the silent compounder theme. We often think that the big purchases are what ruin us, the new car or the fancy house. But Franklin knew it was the tiny daily choices that really mattered. A few cents wasted here and there might not feel like much today, but over a lifetime, those cents grow into a mountain of missed opportunities. Frugality isn't about being cheap or suffering. It is about intentionality. It is the habit of asking, does this purchase actually make my life better, or am I just trying to keep up with the person next door? When you master frugality, you aren't saying no to things you love. You are saying no to things that don't matter so you can say yes to your future freedom. The third pillar, prudence. The third pillar is prudence, which means being wise and thinking ahead. In Franklin's day, people often lived for the moment. They spent what they had as soon as they got it. Franklin realized that the future is always coming, and it usually brings a few surprises. Being prudent means you don't just look at what a thing costs today, you look at what it will cost you tomorrow. If you buy a luxury item on credit, you aren't just paying the price on the tag. You are paying the price plus interest, and you are also paying with the stress of the debt. Franklin used to track his progress in a small notebook. He had 13 virtues he wanted to live by, and every night, he would put a little black mark next to the ones he failed to follow that day. He was his own auditor. He knew that you cannot manage what you do not measure. By being prudent and keeping a close eye on his habits, he was able to see the leaks in his character before they caused his ship to sink. The fourth pillar, the power of waiting. In 1972, a scientist at Stanford University named Walter Mischel conducted a famous experiment that we now call the marshmallow test. He brought children into a room and placed a single marshmallow on a table in front of them. He told the child that he had to leave the room for a few minutes. If the child could wait until he came back without eating the marshmallow, they would get a second one. Some kids ate the treat the second the door closed. Others covered their eyes, kicked their feet, or sang songs to distract themselves. They desperately wanted that second marshmallow. Years later, the researchers followed up with these children. They found that the kids who were able to wait, the ones who practiced delayed gratification, had better grades, lower stress levels, and most importantly, more financial success as adults. This is the fourth pillar of the wealthy mindset, discipline. The world is designed to make you eat the marshmallow right now. Every advertisement, every social media post, and every one-click buy button is trying to get you to spend your money today. The wealthy mindset is the ability to walk away from the small treat today so you can have the feast tomorrow. It is the understanding that waiting is not losing. It is actually the most powerful way to win. The fifth pillar, taking the wheel. Most people believe that their financial life is controlled by outside forces. They blame the economy, their boss, the government, or just bad luck. Psychologists call this an external locus of control. It is the feeling that you are a passenger in your own life. The fifth pillar of the wealthy mindset is shifting to an internal locus of control. This is the firm belief that you are the pilot. While you cannot control the wind or the weather, you can absolutely control how you set your sails. When you have an internal locus of control, you stop saying, "I can't afford that," and start asking, "How can I afford that, or is that worth my time?" You stop being a victim of your bills and start being the architect of your budget. This shift is the moment the financial fog begins to lift. You realize that your bank account is a reflection of your choices, and because you are the one making the choices, you have the power to change the results. The sixth pillar, the truth about the millionaire next door. In the 1990s, two researchers named Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent years studying real millionaires in America. They expected to find people living in mansions, driving Ferraris, and wearing designer watches. What they actually found was much different. The typical millionaire didn't live in a high-end neighborhood. They lived in a normal house. They didn't drive a new luxury SUV, they drove a used Toyota or a Ford truck. They bought their clothes at regular stores and used coupons. These people were the millionaire next door. The biggest lesson from their study was that most people who look rich are actually drowning in debt, while the people who are actually rich are the ones who don't feel the need to show it off. The sixth pillar is simplicity. It is the understanding that wealth is what you don't see. It is the money in the bank, the investments growing in silence, and the peace of mind that comes from having no debt. Real wealth is the ability to say no to a status symbol so you can say yes to your own security. It is the choice to value your freedom more than the opinion of your neighbor. Sarah's realization. Sarah Jenkins sat in a busy coffee shop in downtown Chicago, the steam from her latte rising into the chilly air. Across from her sat her friend Jessica, who was excitedly showing off pictures of her brand-new, white luxury SUV. "It has heated seats in the back for the kids, and the sound system is incredible," Jessica gushed. "The monthly payment is a little scary, but hey, you only live once, right?" A month ago, Sarah would have felt a sharp sting of jealousy. She would have looked at her own 5-year-old sedan in the parking lot and felt less than. She would have spent the rest of the afternoon wondering if she and Dave could squeeze a new car payment into their budget, just so she wouldn't feel left behind. But today, something was different. Sarah had started reading about the 6 pillars, and she found herself looking at the SUV through a different lens. She did some quick mental math. She knew what those vehicles cost. With interest, Jessica was likely paying nearly $900 a month for the next 6 or 7 years. Instead of feeling jealous, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. She thought about her own credit card balance, the $22,412 that kept her awake at night. She realized that Jessica didn't actually own that car, the bank owned it. Jessica was working 40 hours a week just to pay for a shiny metal box that was losing value every single day. For the first time in her life, Sarah didn't want what her friend had. She didn't want the heated seats or the status. She wanted the $900 a month. She wanted the freedom that came from not being tied to a bank. As she took a sip of her coffee, she felt a small spark of power. She wasn't just pinching pennies. She was building a moat around her family. She was becoming an architect. The 24-hour rule. One of the most practical ways to start building these pillars today is by using the 24-hour rule. It is a simple tool designed to fight the dopamine loop that makes us spend money on impulse. The rule is easy. For any purchase over $50 that isn't a basic necessity, like groceries or medicine, you must wait exactly 24 hours before buying it. During those 24 hours, the buying fever usually breaks. The excitement of the new thing starts to fade, and your logical brain takes back control. You might realize you already have something similar, or that the item won't actually make your life better. Most of the time, you'll find that you don't even want the item the next day. This one simple habit can save the average person thousands of dollars a year, and is the first step in moving from a reactive spender to a proactive saver. The silent compounder. Everything in your financial life is either working for you or against you in silence. This is the silent compounder. When you have credit card debt, the interest is a silent compounder working against you. It grows while you sleep. It grows while you are on vacation. It eats away at your future every single second. But when you adopt the wealthy mindset, you flip the switch. When you save money and invest it, the compounder starts working for you. At first, the progress seems slow. You might only save $50 this week. It doesn't feel like it matters. But just like Benjamin Franklin's small marks in his notebook, those $50 wins add up. Over time, the money starts to make its own money. Then that new money makes even more money. This is the way to wealth that Franklin wrote about on that tossing ship in the Atlantic. He knew that the secret to a great life wasn't a sudden stroke of luck. It was the steady, quiet accumulation of good habits. Choosing your foundation. Building a wealthy mindset is like building a house. You cannot start with the roof. You cannot pick out the paint colors for the living room until the foundation is poured. If your mindset is shaky, if you still believe that money is someone else's responsibility or that you need stuff to be happy, then any money you make will eventually leak out of your life. Benjamin Franklin finished his essay just as the ship reached England. He had no idea that his words would be read by millions of people for centuries to come. He just knew that he wanted to help his neighbors see the truth, that their freedom was in their own hands. You have the same choice today that the people of Philadelphia had in 1758. You can continue to complain about the taxes of life, the high prices, the debt, and the stress, or you can decide to stop taxing yourself. You can choose to be industrious, frugal, and prudent. You can choose to wait for the second marshmallow. The financial fog doesn't go away because you earn more money. It goes away because you change the way you see the world. When you stop trying to look wealthy, you finally give yourself the permission to actually become wealthy. Sarah Jenkins left the coffee shop that day and walked past the shiny SUV without looking back. She got into her old car, turned the key, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt in control. She didn't have all the answers yet, and she still had a mountain of debt to climb, but the blueprint was in her hand. The first pillar was in place. The story of her new life was just beginning. 2. Where does all the money go? In 2022, a group of researchers sat down to study how people spend their money in the digital age. They asked hundreds of people to estimate how much they spent each month on subscriptions. Most people gave a confident answer. They counted their Netflix bill, their gym membership, and maybe a music app. They felt they had a good handle on their numbers. Then, the researchers looked at the actual bank statements. The results were shocking. On average, people were spending $133 more every single month than they thought they were. They weren't lying to the researchers, they were lying to themselves. They had forgotten about the old magazine app they never opened, the premium delivery service they signed up for during the holidays, and the free trial that turned into a monthly charge 3 years ago. The money was simply drifting away, like water dripping from a leaky faucet in a room no one ever visits. This gap between what we think we spend and what we actually spend is where financial freedom goes to die. It is a thick gray fog that settles over our bank accounts. We feel like we are working hard and earning a good salary, yet the balance at the end of the month always seems to hover near zero. We blame the economy, we blame our bosses for not giving us a raise, or we blame bad luck. But usually, the culprit is much quieter. It is the invisible leak in the bucket. The woman who counted every penny. In the late 1800s, New York City was a place of wild spending. The wealthy families of the Gilded Age lived in giant mansions on Fifth Avenue. They wore silk clothes imported from Paris and threw parties that cost more than a normal person earned in a lifetime. In the middle of all this glitter and gold lived a woman named Hetty Green. Hetty was one of the richest people on the planet. She owned railroads, mines, and huge chunks of real estate. On paper, she was worth tens of millions of dollars, billions in today's money. But if you saw her walking down the street, you would never have guessed it. She wore a simple black dress that she used until it was threadbare. She lived in modest boarding houses instead of mansions. Because of her dark clothes and her sharp mind for business, the newspapers called her the Witch of Wall Street. While the men in top hats were busy bragging about their latest deals at fancy steakhouses, Hetty was busy with her day books. These were small, handheld ledgers she carried everywhere. Inside these books, Hetty recorded every single cent that came in and every single cent that went out. She was famous for her radical awareness. One story says she once spent half the night searching her carriage for a lost 2-cent stamp. Another story tells of how she refused to pay a few extra pennies for a quart of milk if she knew a shop 3 blocks away sold it for less. To the public, she looked like a miser. They thought she was obsessed with being cheap. But Hetty wasn't just being cheap. She was practicing a level of financial clarity that made her invincible. She understood a truth that most of us forget: you cannot manage what you do not measure. In 1873, a massive financial panic hit the United States. Banks failed. Stock prices plummeted. The big spenders, who lived in mansions, suddenly found themselves broke because they had built their lives on debt and guesses. Hetty Green, however, was perfectly calm. Because she tracked every penny, she knew exactly how much cash she had. She had no debt. While others were begging for loans, Hetty was the one with the money. She didn't